From allies to adversaries, are Pakistan and Afghanistan officially at war? Once a precious ally of the Afghan Taliban, Pakistan encouraged their return to power in Kabul. But as violent aerial and now drone attacks increase, could fighting spiral out of control and destabilize the region? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is the Afghan-Pakistan conflict. Dozens have been killed and over 100 more wounded in the latest round of fighting between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The on and off combat operations dating back to February have mostly seen Islamabad conducting aerial assaults on Afghan territory, including one massive strike in Kabul. But on Wednesday, Afghan officials claimed they sent military drones to target Daesh sites in Pakistan. Now, the lack of clarity on damage and the death toll is symbolic of what actually brought the two former friends to this point. Here's a look now at how allies became enemies and where the Af-Pak conflict is heading.
Pakistan believed a Taliban-led Afghanistan would strengthen its security. Instead, 5 years after welcoming the group's return to power, it is fighting the government it once hoped would secure its western border. The latest round of fighting was triggered by a deadly attack on Pakistani security forces in Karachi, claimed by a splinter faction of the Pakistani Taliban, or TTP. Pakistan responded with airstrikes in eastern Afghanistan, saying it had targeted TTP members behind attacks inside Pakistan. Taliban authorities said at least 36 civilians were killed. Pakistan insists it targeted Taliban infrastructure. Many in Afghanistan reject that account and accuse the international community of looking the other way.
The so-called human rights defenders, who always shout slogans of truth and justice, have they ever asked about these incidents? Dozens and hundreds of innocent people have been killed, but has anyone asked? Have they taken any clear position on this? So far, no, because they have not taken Pakistan to the International Court of Justice to find out what atrocities they have committed.
Pakistan's ties with the Taliban were never simply ideological. Islamabad saw the movement as the best chance of securing a friendly government in Kabul. That government, Pakistan believed, would reduce Indian influence in Afghanistan and give Islamabad greater strategic depth along its western frontier. The Taliban's first regime fell with the US-led invasion in 2001. But Pakistan's strategic calculations barely changed. While publicly backing Washington, Islamabad was repeatedly accused by Western governments of maintaining links with Taliban leaders, allegations it consistently denied. When the Taliban returned to power in 2021, many in Pakistan believed that strategy had finally paid off. Instead, the TTP ended its ceasefire in 2022 and stepped up attacks across Pakistan. Islamabad says many of the group's leaders and fighters now operate from Afghanistan.
What went wrong between the two countries, I think, has a great deal to do with the fact that there has been a very sharp spike in militant violence in Pakistan since the Afghan Taliban came to power. And Pakistan has blamed this violence on the Afghan Taliban. The ruling Afghan Taliban blames it for harboring and offering safe havens to militant groups tied to the Pakistani Taliban.
Since late February, that dispute has escalated into repeated exchanges of airstrikes, drones, and cross-border attacks. Pakistan says lasting stability depends on the Taliban dismantling the TTP's presence inside Afghanistan. Kabul rejects the accusation, insisting Afghan territory is not being used to launch attacks inside Pakistan. That fundamental disagreement has frustrated repeated mediation efforts, producing temporary pauses but no lasting settlement. Pakistan's longest-running regional strategy succeeded in one respect. The Taliban returned to power. Everything that followed has been far less predictable.
Now, Afghanistan under the Taliban is mostly seen as a pariah state due to its multiple violations of human rights conventions, especially in its treatment of women. But Pakistan was one of very few states who actually supported a Taliban return to power. And joining me now to discuss whether that was the right stance to take is from Munich, former Director General of the Inter-Services Intelligence and former Lieutenant General in the Pakistan Army, Asad Durrani. Asad Durrani, thank you so much for being with us. You know, when we last spoke, you had, I guess, not just encouraged, but really defended the Taliban's return to power. You said they were the indigenous people of the country and that the former Afghan government needed to leave along with the United States so that the Taliban could return to the power that they were actually entitled to. Do you regret taking that position now?
Well, the reason is that they are the ones who got this occupation out. They are the ones who suffered for a long time and then finally positioned them in such a manner, not only by fighting, but also by other means, that the Americans were forced to withdraw. So, as far as I'm concerned, they had a legitimate claim on the regime in Kabul.
Okay, so really get rid of an occupation at any cost is at least your defense of their remaining in power. But many of your contemporaries, including the current defense minister, Khawaja Asif, are saying, oops, we should not have supported them. They're not reliable, is actually what the minister said. How could you not really feel that before? One of your government officials, if I'm not mistaken, even said that they would hold elections before they came to power, which was incredibly, I feel, incredibly naive. But you still feel that that was right, even against what your current government says?
You see, people can say whatever they want to. Right now, it's my turn. So I can give the answer. I can also try and rationalize it. No one needs to quote these people whom I've heard so many times. They have their point of view. I will give mine, whatever you want.
Okay, fair enough. But you actually, at one point, you wrote a piece and you quoted former Afghan President Hamid Karzai in describing the AfPak relationship as one of conjoined twins. So they're a true pain in each other's sides, but they can't live without each other. Is Pakistan, though, perhaps now in the process of conducting a very risky surgery to try and separate those twins? And do you think it's a bad risk to take?
Yeah, I mean, that simile was fine. I mean, it happens if you are neighbors, then there are certain conflicts. But in this particular case, after a long, long period of their fighting against occupations, the Soviets, the internal war, and later on against NATO for 20 years, this was time that they deserved certain compassion, a certain help. This was not the time that we had to overburden them with more refugees. And then, most importantly, that we started asking them, which was ridiculous, that you round up these 6,000 or 7,000 people who had been helping you against the Americans, and then hand them over to us. No one can do it, physically cannot be done. We could not do that in the case of Balochistan for the last 70 years. There was a similar number of 5,000 or 7,000 people. Afghans, after all these problems, they had serious limitations, much more limitations that we could have imagined. And now at that time, we want them to, be diverted from their main aim and get after or chase the TTP all over the countryside. That is unreasonable. That's my point.
Okay. Asad Durrani, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us for this segment of the Newsmakers. Great to have you. We can broaden out the discussion now and actually welcome three new panelists. And joining me from Islamabad, former Pakistan ambassador to Washington and former president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Sardar Masood Khan. From Kabul, adjunct lecturer at the American University of Afghanistan, Obaidullah Baheer. And from New York, deputy director of the Middle East program at the Quincy Institute and former U.S. Marine deployed to Afghanistan, Adam Weinstein. Thanks all so much for being with me. Let me start with the ambassador, because you heard the exchange there of a fellow Pakistani really defending the fact that Pakistan defended the return of the Taliban. Some of your contemporaries have said that was a mistake. Here's one that's saying it absolutely wasn't a mistake because it ended an occupation at whatever cost was necessary. I'm wondering what your opinion is.
Well, my opinion is that the problem emanates from Afghan soil right now. And at that time, we were also ready for disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of Taliban, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan cadres. And that can be done even today. But now the law will take its course. But at the same time, you must realize that here Pakistan is defending its territory. What's happening since August 2021 is that Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and its affiliates using the Afghan soil have mounted about 4,000 attacks. And more than 5,000 people have been killed. Half of them security personnel, half civilians. So I think that we are fighting a war. This is not an asymmetric war because, I mean, the most sophisticated weaponry is being used. And the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, despite all denials by the Afghan Taliban, they are being facilitated and they're being given safe havens in Afghanistan and staging ground. So this is not something theoretical. This is something which is happening every day. I mean, on June the 27th, there was an attack. Then they are using, I talked about these sophisticated weapons, and I'd say that they are using these drones, quadcopters. They are also explosive drones. They are also using these machine guns, light machine guns. They're also using grenades. You name it. I mean, most of these weapons were left behind by the United States in August 2021 when they evacuated from Afghanistan. So what we are fighting a war. Look at the scale of the war. And we have been always advocates for closer relations between our two nations because there's no enmity between our two nations. I mean, we have ethnic links between the two countries, religious links, cultural links. We have kinship, as a matter of fact, across the border. And it's kind of two peoples who are separated by a border, but at the same time, they have so many complementarities.
Let me ask Obaidullah then for his opinion, because the ambassador says they're fighting a war. Do you think this war is justifiable?
Thank you for having this debate. I think a war is fought between two armies, between two states, not between an air force and civilians. If this is Pakistan defending itself against Aslam Khan, who is a 23-year-old poet who used to TikTok his videos of poetry that went to rescue the survivors and the injured and the killed in the Tsamkane attack 4 days ago and was hit as a result of a double tap operation. So not only did the government of Pakistan target a civilian home, but also then 5 minutes later target the rescuers that got there. And this is not an opinion. This is New York Times verifying that story. If he thinks that Pakistan is defending itself against 400 patients at a rehabilitation center or oil tankers or other civilian facilities that Pakistan has targeted in the past 8-9 months, then I don't think that does justice to the definition of the word defense. Also, I think the ambassador is mistaken and is alone in his opinion that Pakistan wants to find a diplomatic or a political way forward with the TTP, because that is not the opinion that we hear from policymakers, and that is not the actions that we see from the Pakistani military. There seems to be a delusional goal of wiping out the TTP and wiping out insurgents. Hasn't worked anywhere. It clearly isn't working in Balochistan. It's not working in KPK, and it's not working in the suppression of the Kashmiri protesters that are protesting mistreatment. So there has to be a rethinking of this approach. And unless you talk to your own people, your problems are not going to get solved, not through violence, not through bombing a neighboring country. And I don't know why we would call that defense or within one's right.
Okay. Let me turn to Adam then, as an observer, because there are obviously so many opinions and so many elements at play here, from India's alleged role to Daesh Khorasan, as well as the very complex history and what we even heard described as, the equivalent to conjoined twins. So, Adam, if you can, as an observer, tell us what's most defining this conflict for you right now, if you can simplify it.
Well, it's difficult to simplify. It's good to see the ambassador again, and also my friend Obaidullah. But it's difficult to simplify because it's complicated conflict. I do sympathize with the Pakistanis in that they're experiencing incredible amounts of terrorism by the TTP in KP, occasionally in major cities, and they're seeing casualties among their police and their frontier corps and their army that are at the same level or higher than what the U.S. was experiencing at the height of the surge in Afghanistan. But it's within their borders, and unlike the United States, Pakistan can't simply leave. So it's a difficult situation for them, and it's very difficult to engage diplomatically with the Taliban because the Taliban, similar to the previous government, I think, have a sense of importance about themselves in which they haven't quite grasped that their conflict with Pakistan ultimately is hurting them more than it's hurting Pakistan. The border closure hurts Afghans more than it hurts Pakistanis, although it hurts both. But in the case of the airstrikes, I just think this is a completely misguided approach. And I can tell you that as an American. Look at our war with Iran. Look at our war against the Afghan Taliban for 20 years. In fact, my unit in Afghanistan, the entire raison d'etre of my unit was to coordinate close air support. You can't really defeat an insurgency or lead a CT campaign using airstrikes. And what ultimately happens is you end up killing civilians. Perhaps another reason that Pakistan... Sorry?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I said perhaps another reason Pakistan is engaged in airstrikes is actually not as a means of counterinsurgency, but it's as a way of embarrassing the Taliban or putting pressure on the Taliban. The problem with that is that it just won't work. In fact, every time Pakistan kills civilians in Afghanistan, it actually creates a rally around the flag effect for the Taliban.
Right. Adam, just very quickly, though, do you think Pakistanis that did support the return of the Taliban, especially those as enthusiastically as the general we heard from earlier, do you think they should regret that decision, or is there really there just is no other way? Kind of bad is the best they can do in this scenario?
In 2001, I think the Pakistanis were put in an incredibly difficult position because I think they understood that the United States would ultimately leave, and they were right about that. So they hedged their bets. Unfortunately, that hedge is coming back to haunt them a little bit, but I don't really envy their position, and I think sometimes they receive more criticism than they deserve because it was a difficult situation. But what the Pakistanis have to accept is that Afghanistan's a reality, and they need to let go of this fantasy that they can keep Afghanistan as a sort of a weak client state that will do whatever they want it to do, because that ultimately undermined the previous government, and it's not going to work with a movement like the Taliban.
Okay, let me ask Ambassador Khan what you make of that analysis. And tell us, if you can, what you think they really want to achieve by engaging in this combat, and what you really expect them to be able to achieve by taking the action they've taken.
Well, a couple of points have been made. Let me speak to them. One is that Pakistan is defending its territory. Pakistan is not imagining these attacks, and these attacks are being planned and executed from the Afghan soil. And therefore, Pakistan can't act as a sitting duck for these attacks. That attacks take place, civilians and security personnel are killed, and you do not defend your territory. That would be dereliction of duty for the armed forces, for the security personnel. No sovereign state would do that. Second, we haven't gone berserk that we would start attacking Afghan civilians. We do not attack them. We mount these attacks very carefully, keeping in mind the humanitarian principles of precaution, proportionality, and distinction. we do not want to kill non-combatants. What happens is that these Taliban deliberately locate themselves within civilian neighborhoods. And when we attack Khost or Paktita or Nangarhar, where they have these training camps and safe havens. So this is, or there are many other. The other thing is that in such a war, I would admit that some collateral damage may occur, but it's not deliberate. It's not part of the policy. Second thing is that Afghan Taliban are not innocent. What in the beginning, I mean, Pakistan was the biggest advocate for the legitimacy of the Afghan regime, and we, in fact, established an extended troika, which included the Russian Federation and also the United States and many other countries. We wanted to win recognition for them. And since then, we have been investing in diplomacy. In 2021, 22, 23, 24, we have exhausted all options. China has been involved, so has been Qatar and Turkey, and they have been pursuing diplomacy. But, and let me take another point. I was
We are
talking about
running out of
Afghan
time.
Taliban.
Yeah.
They, but very quickly, I'll say that they are giving financial, logistical, and operational support to Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. And this has been reported by the United Nations itself. I mean, the kind of support that they give, all these United Nations Security Council reports record them very meticulously and faithfully.
Okay, let me come to Obaidullah, because Obaidullah, I saw you throw your hands up in exhaustion there. I know you don't believe that the Taliban is using anyone as human shields and that the Pakistanis are just hitting civilian targets. But on the other point that's very important, why is Kabul fully funding the TTP, knowing that it is a destabilizing organization at best? To what end is Afghanistan supporting their arm in Pakistan and destabilizing not just their relationship, but the region as well?
I think your question was more of a statement than a question. I think that's a claim that the Pakistani military makes. I don't think we have seen enough evidence. The leadership of the TTP has shown itself within Pakistani territory. The attacks are being conducted within Pakistani territory. I was expecting the ambassador to go down his logical end of his argument and then also claim that there are tunnels that are being used by these TTP fighters and the civilians are glued to the ground above so that the Pakistani military targets them. And it's funny that we selectively quote UN reports. So he's willing to quote a UN report, UN sanctions and monitoring report, that does not have teams on the ground in Afghanistan and does state in its report that it is receiving this information from neighboring member states, which is Pakistan. But he's willing to deny UN reports that has claimed hundreds of lives in the Pakistani bombing. So he's willing to cry over 5,000 people, half of them military, but he does not blink an eye at 1,000 or more Afghan civilians being targeted, which is quite unfortunate. But also, please realize this, with regards to the TTP, the Pakistani government was negotiating with the TTP in 2022. So the major change did not happen in 2021 with the coming of power of the Taliban. But in 2022, when in the midst of negotiations that the Afghan Taliban were facilitating and mediating for Pakistan with the TTP, their government changed. They overthrew their prime minister, their military structure changed, and their plan for the TTP changed. And that is an internal policy decision that you cannot then turn around, as the general pointed out earlier. Mr. Asad Durrani told you that they're over expecting from Afghanistan. Afghanistan has a very new government. To expect them to police a 2,600 kilometer Durand line, whilst the Pakistani military supposedly claims to have failed to do so. Also, please see this. If these people are operating from within Afghanistan, tell me how the Pakistani military verified within less than 12 hours that the Karachi attack was orchestrated and planned from Afghanistan and somehow managed to find the targets to kill and then hit them. And then also, if we're talking war crimes and talking about discriminating, tell me how a double tap operation is ever discriminating between civilians. How could you have hit a building and then you clearly see ambulances coming to the rescue and then you hit them again? New York Times has the report,
Okay.
UN has that report. Who's that discrimination?
Adam, let me get some final thoughts from you, and if you can also comment on whether or not you think this fighting and this destabilization is putting the region at risk.
Well, I don't know if it's putting the region at risk. That's a big claim. Unfortunately, I think for both Afghanistan and Pakistan, they're sort of alone in this conflict. I do think the United States and European states should probably be more involved in trying to find a resolution, but that's just not the case because the world is distracted. So Pakistan and Afghanistan really are on their own in this conflict. I agree with the ambassador that Pakistan did make serious diplomatic overtures to the Afghan Taliban and to the TTP. They sent senior delegations, they sent informal delegations, they sent politicians, they sent religious clerics, and I understand their frustration. I keep going back to this point, though, which is that airstrikes are not going to solve their problem. The U.S. military is one of the most advanced, if not the most advanced military in the world, and we bombed a girls' school in Iran. This is what happens when you engage in airstrikes in populated areas. And when you look at the imagery that we saw during this program of those injured civilians, and some of them are children, that fuels TTP propaganda against Pakistan.
Adam, unfortunately, that will have to be the final word. We are completely, actually, over time for this edition of the Newsmakers, so I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us, our viewers for being with us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We will see you next time.